All right, well, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. We're going to have the artist talk for two of the artists that are featured in the exhibition hOURS. We have both Audrey and Millian both here to share with us. The exhibition is in our learning resource library on the ground floor, and it will be up for 4 months, which we're super excited to have your work for that amount of time. So first we're going to have Audrey share about her work. See if we can get things switched over with our slides. So there's kind of an image of the space. And then, so we'll have Audrey start us off, but I just wanted to thank you both so much for sharing your work with us. And I'll let Audrey sort of take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this opportunity. And it's really fun to see all of you in the classroom. I do teach at Ball State University, which is located in Muncie, Indiana. It's about an hour north of Indianapolis. And for any of you students there that might be first generation, I just wanted to give a shout out that I'm also a first generation person to go to college in my family. And to go to college for the arts seemed like a pretty radical thing, at least in my family. Still, I feel as if my family asked me questions like, what are you going to do with your art degree? And even though I'm an assistant professor, I think the good answer and a little bit of advice that I'll give you before talking about my own work is when someone asks you that question, what are you going to do with your art degree? Tell them you can do what you want and you're going to carve your own path. So that's my little bit of advice to you that I see in the 2D design room. So carve your own path and do what you want with your art degree. There are so many different paths out there. So a little bit about my work. The works that are featured in this show are from 2020 and 2021, which I think a lot of us have a shared experience during the pandemic together. And my work is about merging feminist symbology with the esoteric science of sacred geometry. And I'll just break that down a little bit for you. In sacred geometry, it really comes down to a lot of different shapes and meanings. And there's a lot of like spiritual and cultural meanings that go into sacred geometry. And the two main ones that I focus on is a triangle form and also a grid. So oftentimes you'll see a triangle that's an upright position. And that really is talking about very masculine forces. It can speak to a mountain and power. And when it's inverted, it's more reference to the feminine and to a valley. And what I really like to think about is how can we use some feminist ideas where we could merge together and be equal. And I think that if we could be equal together as humans, we can accomplish a lot. So even though my work is abstract, there is a little bit of a political message that I'm putting out there to really think about, unity amongst us. So a lot of the work is about the relationship between equality and balance. And I think about geometry as something that we all really, identify with in our everyday life. And I try to add different elements into my work. So the paintings that are with you all are a little bit smaller than some of the other works that I make. So the largest size is 18 by 16. And then the smallest is a 12 by 10. Most of the paintings are made with acrylic paint. They also have this paint called Flash, which is a very matte vinyl-based paint. And there are some graphite drawing elements to them. And some of the canvases are printed. In fact, I think all of them in this exhibition. The canvas is actually printed, and you'll see a little bit of the print coming through. And the print is referencing that Photoshop background. And I like to think about it as a space where things to begin on. It's also in reference to how we view art today. We, see so much of our art online that we don't really go out in person and see it. I like to tell my students, like, go touch grass, which I'm sure is a reference that you're all familiar with. But getting out and seeing work in person, you can really appreciate the craft and the work that goes into it. A lot of the paintings have a combination of very matte areas and then other areas that can be very high gloss. I also add mica into some of the glazing, and so you might see a little bit of a shimmer to the paintings as well. There are, in some of the works, sewn elements, and that's a reference to my grandmother. When I was a child, I grew up right next to my grandparents, and my grandmother was a painter, and she was absolutely amazing. She did a lot of painting from observation, a lot of landscapes, and set up her own still lifes. She would even have people sit for her, and she'd paint portraits. And as she got older, she lost her eyesight, and her work became very abstract. And I just, when I was younger, got really obsessed with abstraction through seeing how her work changed and evolved. In fact, I really remember a pivotal point in her artistic practice where my grandfather, noticed that she was really struggling with her painting, and I would help her mix her colors and help out in her studio. And he realized that what she really needed to do is to work larger. And so he built these larger canvases and prepped them for her, gesso, and got her some larger brushes, and then said, Thelma, which I love her name, Thelma. He said, you have been painting the world around you your whole life. Now it's your time to paint the world that's inside of you. And when I think about abstraction, we can think about it as abstracting from the world around us, but we really can think about, like, what is inside of us and what makes us who we are, and how can we bring that out into our work. And so that's something that I try to aim to do. She was a really amazing sewer. She could do quilts and all this amazing stuff. I cannot really sew, and so I thought during the pandemic I would give it a go. And I've learned just some very basic sewing techniques, but I like to think about them for the paintings that have them as a challenge for me. What I did was I took part of the canvas that has that Photoshop print on it, and then I took raw canvas with nothing printed, and I just kind of haphazardly put them together and created a line or a few lines, and I sewed a composition. And then that gave me kind of a starting ground to begin. I prepped all the canvas with a clear gesso so you could see that canvas coming through. And then from there, it was almost like a call and response to really think about how can I react to some of these linear lines that are making their way in the artwork, and then go from there. I do a lot of sketches, and if things go well, The paintings can move along pretty timely, but oftentimes the paintings don't go the way that I want them to be. I do a lot of masking with tape, and you can't quite tell the color combination as much as you try to plan until you pull off the tape. And oftentimes just the color combination doesn't quite work. And so it's retaping and prepping and then kind of starting over and just reacting. And that's something that I think that my practice really lends to, is that call and response act. A lot of times the works will be in reference to sometimes other artists that I look at. For this body of work, Annie Albers pops up a lot in the work. So does Helma F. Klimt, and Sarah Keene is a contemporary artist that comes up in the work. But there are figurative elements. I like to think that anything that has like a highlight of a fluorescent red as almost a breast form that you'll see in the works. So that's something that some students have asked, are these figurative? And yes, they are. And Amy, that's all I have for now. I don't know if I can't see on your end if you've rolled through the images, but if there are any questions or anything in dialogue, I'm happy to discuss.
I think this is the last slide of the grouping of images. Maybe we could reserve questions for the end if you're okay with that, and maybe we can kind of have an open discussion at the end.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Awesome. All right. Unless anybody has a pressing question, do you write it down? Thank you very much, Audrey. And I've got notes here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I do want to ask. Okay, then I think we will switch it over to, see if I can get there we go. So Millian as well, thank you so much for joining us. There's some bio information that's listed here. And I do want to emphasize that both of you are both educators in art as well as making art. So I think it's really exciting to see how the relationship between the art practice and the art educator sort of seem to show through. So, all right, well, Millian, I'll let you take it away.
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to replace the current shared screen. So you all bear with me for a bit. You can see this now, correct? All right, perfect. All right, I've got it sorted out. All right, I'm going to read notes from my iPad, which is going to be better than dual wielding on my laptop screen. Thank you, everybody, for spending some of your time today listening to me talk about my artwork. I'm currently an assistant professor of art. I teach studio art foundations at Auburn University in Alabama. So you can hear my voice reflecting my environment and that I grew mostly up in the south of the United States. So today, I'm going to talk to you about how I first got my dual concentration in painting and printmaking throughout my undergrad. But during this time, I used stuffed animals as metaphors for the issues I suffered in an abusive household. And how poverty exacerbates those sort of friction in the family. And I knew that I would never be able to own a luxurious fur coat. So, nor ever have a bear rug. So I made my own by purchasing stuffed animals of a certain color range from thrift stores, wash them, skin them, then sew them into the proper form. No animals were harmed in the making of either of these objects, but at the heart of this is the notion of affordability and resourcefulness. And then I went to grad school for sculpture. I had a very rich practice in which I've been able to tap into the various resources around me to create works based on a theme and approach. I have way too many interests to be tied down to a specific material or medium, but I let my circumstances help drive my material and thematic explorations, which, goes into the work in the current show. So I can talk about some of the works in the exhibition at the LRC Gallery, what led up to them, and how they form my current investigations. So, in a previous and highly demanding job, I experienced extreme limitations that caused me to pause my art practice, which was a shame. I was struggling with teaching classes for 8 hours a day, and I would be lucky if those were not broken up throughout the day, and it was 4 days a week, so it was very tiring. I was in a strange position that emphasized teaching, yet still valued research, but many of the grants and funding opportunities were not accessible to me. So after 3 years of this, I was burnt out, and I had to figure out something to salvage my spirit and my sanity. So I looked at the resources I already have and looked to limitations as opportunities. I fished out old fabric I had squirreled away from previous moves, salvaged half-dried tubes of acrylic paint, and broke out the needles for embroidery. I experimented with painting my own way and many types of needlework, including punch needle embroidery that you can see on the bottom left. I also reconsidered my artistic practice to become more accessible for myself and gallery staff. I was a former gallery director, and having installed many shows on my own, I understood like the burden of show installation on gallery staff, all the things that goes into it, all the things that people don't see, which is like 95% of it. So I set out to create a more manageable art practice. I wanted to make my works light for ease of shipping and handling, make it small to suit my small home studio, make it mobile so I could get in a few stitches as I wait for meetings or long class periods to start, and make it modular for instances when size does matter. So it was also during this time that new research in the social sciences confirmed many of the oppressive attitudes and systemic barriers I experienced in this job, and many others. Many others felt the same way. The frustration and anxiety of my job was exacerbated when certain more powerful colleagues denied or dismissed my concern for psychological and emotional safety when they said, "We don't have that problem here." That problem being racism and microaggression in Alabama. So I'll let you connect how wrong that sounds. This was seen not only in student perceptions of my courses, but in various performance evaluations of my job. Metrics were murky and gray zones were kept intentionally hazy. As with all gray zones, it is either used for good or ill. As a solutions-oriented person, I had no interest in trying to control what is out of my control. I had been at this long enough to know that time and energy are wasted when people are not willing to listen. I look to art making to channel the frustration of my situation. I look to simple compositional devices such as figure-ground relationship or negative and positive space, and how pictorial space can be manipulated, like Rene Magritte and the Surrealists, to question perception. I also spent a lot of time decoding metrics and understanding double meanings when solutions were offered to me or when my ability and competence were questioned. Much of my self-education was around seeing how double standards were imposed based on how likable a person was or how they appeared rather than the content of their character. And especially in this instance, it was my competence and my ability to do my job. So instead of letting these doubts hang on me, I transposed those questions into art. I looked at abstractionist compositions and added my own personal content to the work, which I knew was antithetical to the impersonal content of compositions such as hard edge abstractionism, but perhaps aligned with the meditational approach of abstract expressionism and color field. The text in each work references the oppressive actions and ill effects of a system due to negligence or overt malice. So I had to navigate these systemic barriers to figure out these distorted metrics of success. The works became visual puzzles that I had to navigate through, and instead of making the viewer do the same, the solution of each semi-legible word in a composition are offered on the title of each piece. The viewer has the option to figure out the visual puzzle themselves or to read the title card, but I was more interested in the viewer seeing the issue through my eyes than spending all their precious time and effort figuring it all out. So I'm very appreciative of being able to explore complex ideas using these compositional devices, which built the foundations for me to explore more complex ideas in my current investigations. And I'm also very appreciative that, you all are letting me show these works in the LRC Gallery, so it can continue to live on. So after 5 hard years, I finally escaped that awful position. But I knew instances that, like mine, were one of many, and my situation was one of many data points. I was gainfully employed in a better position that supported my research. Unfortunately, that happened during the pandemic, and I found myself in the interesting position of having to be the care of students and other folks due to my gender. It was also during this time that I looked at mother of pearl inlay lacquer art, which I grew up around. So depending on the area, lacquer craft is dependent on the sap of a specific species of sumac. So for Vietnam, this is the specific species of sumac that we use for lacquer craft, all of which are difficult to harvest and handle and very exploitative to women and children who usually are the one who harvest these sap. And I started incorporating this mother of pearl inlay lacquer aesthetic into my work. Instead of using the risky and toxic process of lacquer work, much of which is not accessible to me, I looked to how the process of needlework and embroidery could speak to this idea of labor and conveying tradition. I looked at the essential elements to each mother of pearl inlay lacquer composition and distilled it to fit my explorations. I also invented new ways of preparing the surfaces of my mixed media embroidery, employing calligraphy, painting, and beading, in addition to traditional needlework. So the image on the left is the matrix to create my calligraphy. I also sourced imagery from silk painting, other types of lacquer work, and souvenir art. These usually contain romanticized notions of rural living in Vietnam, and having lived it and survived it, the reality was not anywhere close to these, but I could capitalize on these typical imagery to speak on deeper issues. So the image on the right is a typical schoolgirl uniform of the traditional Vietnamese áo dài. And I used it in this instance to combine notions of girlhood, beauty, and tradition and status through the lacquer aesthetic. The text on this is "Be Ugly in Peace," which I'm sure a lot of you recognize. So this is based on the idea that everyone should be able to be ugly in peace and without unsolicited judgment. This work, Disobedience, is about the Confucianist idea that a woman has very specific roles in society. When she is young, she must obey her father. When she is married, she must obey her husband. And when she is widowed, she must obey her eldest son. And what my mom loved to repeat to me is, if you don't get married, you should just become a nun. I don't like that. So this image of a woman fishing is a common imagery in many silk paintings. And the subject of this work is depicted or is intended to speak about how being an independent woman with my own job, my own house, and my own bank account is to disobey these outdated notions. So you're probably seeing a theme to my work. I understand tradition to be an important component for a person to be a part of a culture, but tradition can hinder social progress and individual growth, and that is what I was trying to get at. In this work, you see that text still plays a major role in combination with the kitschy imagery and lacquer aesthetic. This is called Buffalo Bum Cycle Breaker because of the personal, cultural, and historical meanings behind it. So I grew up in the countryside of Vietnam until I was 7. During that time, I've seen buffalo and ox herders drove their herds through the narrow dirt roads in front of my house and made a huge mess as well as letting their herds graze randomly at whatever they could reach into ours and neighboring yards. It was annoying and took a while for us to fix the roads while dodging their pies as we navigate to go to school. My parents would often point to them and said, make sure you study and grow up to be a doctor. Otherwise, you would be a buffalo bum. It took me a while to learn how classist this was because my parents' personal experiences with these herders are good reasons for them to say this, even though it was wrong. Now, this is called cycle breaker because I didn't become a doctor. I did not meet my parents' expectations. I, in fact, shamefully paid my way through undergrad and got my BFA, then paid my way to get my MFA in sculpture. Since I also play the flute and I was born the year of the ox, this became a self-portrait. But this image of a boy sitting on an ox is pervasive, and I had to find out why. So it wasn't until much after making that piece that I learned about the ox herding lesson of Zen Buddhism and how the 10 verses by Kowan Shiyuan also came with ink paintings by Tensho Shubun, which emerged in 12th century China. So in verse 6 and its illustration, the searcher happily rides the bull home playing the flute. So there's that image. So this cultural and historical angle to this imagery doesn't change the way that I view what I have made, but certainly gave me more context to understand the lack of acceptance for Buddhism and other religious beliefs that my parents learned from the Catholic Church because I was raised very devout Catholic. So much of the social commentary in my works are made to seem like it broadly applies to many people, which is my main hope, but they usually came from my personal experiences. I operate with the philosophy that if the struggles I worked through on an individual level is indicative of a larger trend, then it is worthwhile for me to explore those themes in my work. And if it's not indicative of larger trends, I'm just like, yeah, that's a personal thing I need to work through. So this work, Give to Burden, is about how women burden each other with learned notions of the patriarchy. And I want to show this slide right here just to reiterate how important it is to think about compositional devices when making work, especially work that tries to buck traditions and subvert traditions as well. And this is some more of my recent work. This is from 2023. I went back and added in seemingly strange tropical fruits that I grew up with and eating and missed, such as sweet sop, dragon fruit, papaya, and cashew. I experimented with other ways of obfuscating text, such as overlapping, subtraction, and a combination of those. And here's another mapping of how I went about, thinking about directionality and dividing up my picture plane to create the cohesive and well-balanced composition. So finally, I want to speak about works that I recently completed this summer and exhibited for the first time just up the road from you all at the Reese Bullen Gallery at Cal Poly in Humboldt County. I say up the road, but it's like 5 hours or more. I combined all that I've learned so far and decided that it was time to go big because I've been making really small works. I was like, it's the pandemic's over. It's time to make big works. So I made these two large multi-panel works that hang in such a way that allow both sides of the tapestry to be seen. And I looked at large panels such as Japanese and Korean screens to help make the larger works, but mostly I wanted to figure out why mother of pearl inlay lacquer art has this propensity to forget about a cast shadow. This concern came from a colleague who offhandedly made a comment about how she doesn't let her students paint without painting cast shadows. Well, I would be in big trouble by that metric. But this is not a dig or a disagreement with my colleague's teaching philosophy. Rather, her comment made me reflect on the nature of lacquer art and if this is a trend that is seen in other Asian art. So it just made me like really think about my practice and why I'm gravitating towards this. So after searching, I've seen a similar approach in various other Asian art, but I was especially struck by Rinpa, which is a Japanese school of painting started in the 18th century. So from Rinpa, figures float with the quality of mokotsu, which means boneless or without outline. I couldn't fully ascribe to mokotsu, but I appreciated how the vibrant colors of Rinpa are applied in a decorative manner and pattern manner, and through mediums such as paintings, textiles, ceramics, and you guessed it, lacquerware. What struck me when looking at Okata Korin and Suzuki Kitsu's works was the sense of space depicted on panels. I looked at these panels as a cohesive unit, but each could be taken as a complete composition on its own. So I created each of these double-sided multi-panel tapestry with this additional goal in mind. This is called Cultivating Calmness, Serotonin Serenade. So each panel is a closed composition that comes together to create a whole other image. I also played with subtle and not so subtle perspectival shift. On side one, the conical hats, those are conical hats that acts as lily pads, start out with ellipses that are more flat, and the one on the right is more rounded. So the transition is more than just a gestural mark of the paint on top. The embroidered hand is reflected with the two colors of thread so that on side two, it shows an appropriate level of contrast as the hands contemplate and reach for words that are arranged based on the atomic structure of serotonin. The text is a mixture of positive and negative words such as poor and compassion, hope and cheer and hate, and emptiness with reclaim. Most of these are rotated sideways to further play on perspective. So the text is based on Vietnamese monogram style of text used to celebrate various holidays and events. I grew up helping my dad draw these texts to make decor for the new year because we were poor and we just had to make our own decor. So I adapted it to fit my purpose for art. So after making the celebratory monograms for cultivating calmness, I wanted to modify the text even further and translate it into the shape of lily pads. You can see how I like trace out the lily pad shape. So came the second piece, which is based on the idea that a lotus is like the hand of the Buddha in various mudras. This is called Cultivating Contentment, Blooming in the Mud. It's about holding on to cultural values, but expressing personal needs. This work is an attempt at finding calmness and beauty among the muddy waters of gender expectations, cultural memories, and surviving through constant stress. I wanted to convey this sense of hope and contentment through the gestural strokes of paint, which some of you can recognize it as a modified pencil, and juxtapose it with the deliberate crafting of each embroidered stitch. So I want to show you some up-close images of these. So the text, so this is the hand, so front and back. So that says cutting curses. This is weaponized weakness. This says make ends meet. So this was how it started. All right, and this is where I'm at. So I'll take some of your questions regarding what I presented today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was, I've got like a list of Post-it notes down here. Does anybody have any questions from our class or comments or anything that have come to mind through hearing from both of the artists? You like, oh no. So some things that I think is quite fascinating is one, how you know, on the curation side of deciding like how to pair certain artists together. And I feel like when I and some of the other faculty, when we were reading both of your statements and then looking at your work, the sort of layered research, I think was so profound and how it transcends through formal qualities. So it really feels like the structure of each composition of each piece, the formal elements are very much considered, but add to the meaning of the work. Like it's fundamental to what is being expressed. I guess it's more of a comment than a question. I feel like for any artist that that balance of how to embed personal experience into work, yet make the work approachable for people that haven't necessarily had that exact same shared experience, I think also transcends really well in both of your work. I don't know if either one of you want to add on to that or
I can start, but please stop me because I don't want to overtalk and steal the air. You know, a lot of my work uses lived experience, and that is very tricky to insert into your art. And I know that for many young artists, when they start out and they want to explore these topics, it can be a minefield, especially when, you know, professors and peers are not ready to talk about these issues. So I've been through all of it, like all of the most horrible art critiques you could ever experience and the comments that people would make about my work. So I'm very prepared to, you know, like defend my work. And that's why, you know, I do a lot of research. I couldn't share a lot of the research with you all today, but I'm a huge nerd. And that's simply because I want to continue. I hate to say this, but to shield myself with these research because it's so important to basically find validation in these other disciplines that could help me basically say that, yeah, what you make is important. Like these individual issues is not just an individual issue. There's a larger trend to it. So, you know, like I would encourage all folks who are starting out to insert their lived experience in their work. If it's frustrating, I totally understand. But, you know, part of being in school is that you are in this very protected space where your teachers and peers should respect your ability to explore controversial lived experience or any sort of like the topics that are just very difficult to talk about. And, you know, we go through it so that in the end, you know, things will be easier to talk about. So Audrey, I'll let you.
Thank you. Millian, I thought that your presentation was absolutely wonderful. And thank you. So good. We have some similarities that I think is really interesting. I was raised Catholic as well. And the value in my family was to get married, be beautiful, and get married. The idea of going to college was like not even a thought in my family at all. I remember when I said that I was thinking about going to college, my father said, you know, I'm not sure it's for everyone, meaning me. And then when I said that I wanted to go to school for art, it was like, oh yeah, we're not going to pay for that. You're on your own. And so I feel you to advocate and, really follow your own path outside of what your parents' expectations are for you is always a challenge. And I think that it's something that it finds its way into my work, of course. When I think about what is my first inspiration and draw into my art, it's my grandmother. And when I think about abstraction, it all comes, stems from her. And when I think about, a lot of the research that you hit on, I really think about gender equality. How great would it be if we could look at each other and not have any of these stereotypes or expectations set? And what if things were a little bit more fair in this world? And so that's something that, I dive into and bring out my work, but I try to bring it out in a universal way. I don't think that you're going to get it when you first see the work. And hopefully it's almost like a Trojan horse, like it's something that you can like stop and spend a little time with. And then if you're lucky, you can read what the artist has to say or listen to them and hopefully connect a little bit more with it. So. Also, I worked in a gallery as well and was a director. So that's something, Amy, I'm probably sure when you saw the works packed, that's something that really comes together when I think about being an artist too. So I love how we have some cool similarities here.
I think similar things to note on that seems to sort of show through in both of your work. And I think for most of us as students, right, resourcefulness is kind of like a fundamental way of being a creative person. Like you have to be really resourceful with not just your materials, but your time. And I think, really sort of taking hold that resourcefulness doesn't mean that you're being cheap with your practice. It means that you're being productive with what you have, but it's sort of creative problem solving. I think, Millian, you said limitations as opportunities. And I think that's something that even as we enter through different transitions in time, like how different phases of our lives present us with a lot of different limitations. And I think for most of you guys as students, do you not feel like there's certain limitations with what you're kind of like maybe, what are some limitations that you guys feel like you may have? What's that? What about like a working space?
Yeah, and then the materials that we're supposed to use.
Right.
And then the guidance to the assignment.
Right.
It's, you don't want it, children to sort of under this, but you have to do it within the restrictive period.
Right. So they're saying kind of like limitations sometimes with the materials that you're required to use in a particular class. Like sometimes you struggle with what you're being required to do with how you can sort of meet the objectives of a given assignment. So I think I really feel like I so appreciate that, again, going back to sort of the formal elements are there, but they're being presented with such care and consideration and sort of fidelity of how expansive they can be, and with different materials. So I think pairing your work together in the same space is presenting, has its own sort of conversation and dialogue between the two works, the two types of works that are together.
Thank you for that observation. I really like that adage of like necessity is the mother of invention. It is something that I live by all the time. And I know that, as an educator myself, when I give an assignment with very limited parameters, I understand why students would feel that, they don't have the ability to fully be creative. But, like working with the material and pushing it to its limit and learning everything about it, like that is part of why we're here, to learn how to creatively problem solve through all of that. And, I had that quote on there, the Frederick Barth quote about limitations as opportunities or affordances, because that is something that I deal with not only in the material and time limitation that I have, but also in cognitive limitation. I recently completed another lecture on cognitive limitations and how a lot of my work, I didn't go into this, but it deals with using semiotics as the foundation, but semiotics as a way to understand how people misread my work, and how cultural signifiers require the shared meaning for us to understand. But, like regardless of how much explanatory comma I provide in my artist statement, my work, or throughout the context of so many other decisions I make, if my viewer does not have the cognitive models to understand my work, then it's going to happen. There's going to be misunderstanding. So one of the things that I contend with is that, we have so many cognitive models in our lives. And so if my work itself can serve as a metaphor or an analogy so that people can at least start to process some of these signifiers a little bit better, then I would say that that is a success, even if they are still getting it wrong or misreading it. So, like that's how I think about limitations and barriers, is that, like there's a reason these barriers exist. My work can help generate better understanding, even if it takes a while.
That's really beautiful. I don't know if I can really top too much there. I'll just say that on a practical sense, that when you get out of art school, the things that everyone faces, usually no matter who you are, is time, space, and money. And I try to tell my students to fit in their art practice into their lives. And so find a way to work with materials that you can afford or recycle materials. And then, time, that's a little tricky one. I've been one of those people where I have to put in my art practice before I go to work, after I go to work. My weekends sometimes are filled making art. And space, you can always have a home apartment. I used to be an oil painter, and when I went to grad school, I did a lot of large scale sculpture, and had all these really great resources in a wood shop. And after graduation, I had to rethink what my practice looked like, working in a gallery full time. And realizing that my time was limited, I moved my studio into a spare bedroom of our apartment in Chicago, and then tried to find a way to work my practice in. And I think that that's something that we all have to work with. And the idea of working smart really came through for me during that time. And it's something that I still am a big planner with my practice. So.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing about your work, and I will just put this last thing on here. So I will have this available up on YouTube so people can continue to watch it and have it available to them. I thank you both so much, and I will follow up with you both after, but such an inspiration. Got my notes written down, things I want to implement, and we'll be in touch. Thank you both so much.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.